The city was buzzing that evening, a crisp autumn wind weaving through the streets as people hurried home or wandered into the warm glow of restaurants and cafes. Among them walked Armin, a man in his early 30s with a calm face but eyes that carried the heavy weight of unspoken regrets. He had just returned to town after years of chasing opportunities in another country. His business had grown, his pockets were full, but his heart had never felt more empty. That night, instead of going straight to his hotel, he decided to wander. He turned down a familiar street he hadn't walked in years, a street lined with little shops and eateries that had once been his and Sarah's favorite spots. Sarah. The name alone made his chest tighten. She was the woman he once loved fiercely, the woman he had married in his early 20s when life seemed like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. But with dreams pulling him in one direction and her needs anchoring him in another, their marriage had slowly unraveled. They had parted ways, cold, bitter, and broken. Now, years later, Armin pushed open the door to a small restaurant. The smell of warm bread and simmering soup wrapped around him, comforting yet haunting. The place wasn't fancy, just wooden chairs, softly glowing lamps, and a few families gathered around their meals. He looked around for a table, but then his eyes locked onto something that made his entire body freeze. There she was, Sarah, his ex-wife, but she was not as he remembered. She wore a simple apron, her hair tied back and exhaustion painted across her face. Yet what stunned him most was the curve of her belly, round and unmistakable. She was pregnant, and she was carrying plates, serving food to strangers, smiling faintly despite the fatigue in her steps. Armin's breath caught in his throat. 1,000 memories crashed over him. The way they used to laugh late into the night, the promises they made, the arguments that drove them apart. He had always thought she moved on, maybe remarried, maybe living a life better than the one he gave her. But here she was, working late in a modest restaurant, expecting a child. His first instinct was to look away, to slip out quietly before she noticed. But something rooted him in place. His chest ached as if the universe had thrown him into this moment deliberately, forcing him to face the choices he once made. Sarah turned, holding a tray, and her eyes fell on him. For a second, the world stopped. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, all faded into silence. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes widening in shock. The tray in her hands trembled, but she steadied herself and walked past him, pretending not to care. Yet he could see it, the storm behind her eyes, the hurt she had buried deep. Armin sat at a corner table, his hands shaking. He ordered nothing, simply sat there, watching her move through the room, serving others with a grace that looked painful. Every step she took seemed to cut into him. He thought of how he had left her when she needed him most, chasing dreams while she held on to a marriage that was slipping through her fingers. He remembered their last fight, her voice breaking as she said, "One day you'll realize success means nothing if you've lost the people who believed in you." At the time, he dismissed her words. Now they came back, sharper than ever. Minutes turned into an hour. He couldn't bring himself to leave, nor could he approach her. Finally, when the crowd thinned and the restaurant grew quieter, Sarah walked over to his table. She didn't sit. She didn't smile. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her pain. "What are you doing here, Armin?" He swallowed hard. I didn't know you worked here. I didn't know." His gaze dropped to her belly, then back to her eyes. "You're pregnant." Sarah's lips tightened. She placed the tray on the table and crossed her arms as if shielding herself. "Yes. Not that it's any of your concern anymore." Her words stung, but he knew she was right. He had no right to ask, no right to interfere, and yet his heart ached in a way he couldn't explain. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words felt too small for the weight they carried. Sarah laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Sorry. Do you know how many nights I spent waiting for you to come home? Do you know how it felt to watch the man I loved choose ambition over love, success over us? Sorry doesn't feed you when you're alone. Sorry doesn't heal what's broken." Her voice cracked, and she quickly turned away, wiping at her eyes before the tears could fall. Armin wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to promise he was different now. But he stayed silent, realizing that his words might mean nothing to her anymore. When her shift ended, he waited outside, not to stalk her, but because something inside him told him he couldn't let this night end like that. Sarah stepped out into the chilly night, pulling her coat tighter around her. When she saw him there, she frowned. "You should leave, Armin. Please." He nodded slowly. I'll leave. But can you just tell me, are you okay? Do you have someone? Someone to support you? Her silence stretched painfully. Finally, she said softly, not everyone gets second chances, Armin. I made my choices. Now I live with them. He wanted to ask more, but he knew pressing her would only push her farther away. So he simply said, if you ever need help, I'll be here. Even if it's just as a stranger willing to carry a little of the weight. Sarah looked at him, her eyes glistening in the dim light. For a moment, he thought she might soften, that she might let down her walls. But then she shook her head, whispered goodbye, and walked away into the night. Armin stood there long after she disappeared from sight, his heart heavy with guilt, but also burning with a strange new resolve. For the first time in years, he realized that all his success, all his wealth, meant nothing if it couldn't heal the pain he had caused. He had once walked away from kindness, from love, from responsibility. Now, perhaps life had brought him back to face what he had lost, not to erase the past, but to see if he could grow into someone better. And as he walked back through the empty streets, one thought refused to leave him. Maybe, just maybe, kindness was the bridge to redemption, even if the person he wanted forgiveness from could never offer it.